We're back live. It's the Jeff Santos Show, and folks, we're talking off air with our great producer Bob about these schools and how important it is, because of the fact that we're educating our future leaders, and these are people who are going to be the mayors, the governors, the presidents, the leaders in the business community, the leaders and the future teachers, academics, and people who are on the radio, on TV. So it is critical that we do it, and we need to do better. All right, it's time to go to Seattle, WA, where we find our Renaissance man. He's here every Tuesday. You can follow him at Democracy News. You can follow him at Daily Kos. You can find him here every Tuesday on the Jeff Santos Show. He's on Twitter all the time. He's fantastic. He is a great friend of the program. Mark Taylor-Canfield. Happy holidays, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jeff, and it's been a great show. I've been listening. It's so great to hear Robert Craig's analysis of this proto-fascist stage that we've entered into in this country where, one-third of the people, he said, support one-party rule, permanent one-party rule. Great guests, Alan Grayson, Greg Pallas, one of my favorite investigative journalists. Yours is one of the only programs even discussing voter suppression at the moment. So, we're entering the holiday period here, and there's been a lot going on in Seattle, including these impeachment rallies that are happening later that we can talk about.
Yeah.
But, I'm still concerned for my country because I'm hearing, neo-fascism, oligarchy, voter suppression, an electoral college that doesn't actually elect the candidate that gets the popular vote, the majority of the popular vote. And I would say, one of the greatest panaceas I can think of at the moment, Jeff, for this situation is a pro-democracy movement with somebody like Bernie Sanders at the lead, because people, and especially, if you look at that new poll you were talking about, the voters under the age of 35,
right?
52% for Sanders.
That's
they
right.
are tired of the status quo. They're fed up with politics as usual, and they know that the government is in gridlock. It's in this two-party battle, and meanwhile, nobody's addressing climate change. Nobody's taking on the Green New Deal, which is another thing we could talk about, actually, because my representative has been involved in the impeachment hearings. Pramila Jayapal had a conference call last night that I was invited to participate in, and she talked a lot about the Green New Deal. I'm really impressed by her. She is such a intelligent, powerful woman. She's got so many issues that she's working on: healthcare, the impeachment, Green New Deal. Oh my gosh, she's all over the place, and she's very, very solid. Her policy wonk status in my book is way up there because she knows what she's talking about. She knows how Washington, D.C. works. She's only, this is her second term, but she's like a veteran now. I mean, she's doing great. So it's great to see her, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar and all of these, great, new, powerful women in the Congress stepping up and saying, guess what, good old boys network, we're not going to take it anymore. So listen up, we got something to say here. And she's one of those progressive fighters that will keep doing that. I have a lot of faith in her as an individual, too.
So consistent in her views and really passionate about not only Medicare for All, but a number of other issues. So I am excited about her, and I would hope that someday she runs for U.S. Senate, because we need to get some real passion progressives. Time for some change and more progressive change. Mark, I was thinking about this the other day. In the late 80s, the world of music was sort of dumbed down. Just a lot of other, sort of pop music that was going nowhere. And there came Nirvana, and there came the Seattle sound. And I want to look at this. We've talked about this, a little bit. But, that revolution, if you might, was also, similar to where we are right now in society. We were tired. This is coming out of the Reagan period of 8 years, and then, Bush got elected in the fall of 88. And then in 89 and 90, and we saw Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and all that kind of stuff that came out. And think in a lot of ways, I'm hoping that we see bands like your own and others as we move into what hopefully will be a Bernie Sanders type era, because we're going to be sick and tired of Trump. And I'm just wondering, from your vantage point as a performer and somebody who obviously goes to a lot of music shows in a city like Seattle, if we're going to, have this sort of at the end of the decade, you remember in the late 70s, was punk rock, it was the Sex Pistols and the Clash and all that kind of stuff. And then again in the late 80s, as I said. So I want to get your thoughts on that before we maybe get to some of the other political issues.
Yeah, definitely. Seattle is a great city for music. That's why I moved here. I've been very impressed. Last night was the 6th anniversary of the Mojam series that takes place every Monday night at the Nectar, which is this amazing place where some of the best musicians in town get together to meet and form bands and jam together on stage and just kind of support each other like a family. And I have seen that a reoccurrence of a feeling of family in Seattle amongst the music fans and the musicians, not only because of, I think, the election of Donald Trump, which brought a lot of people together. There's also, Pearl Jam had 2 shows about a year ago at Safeco Field and raised millions of dollars, to try to end homelessness in Seattle. So there has been a coming together of the community around social and political issues, environmental issues. Bernie Sanders, during his 2016 campaign, before the general election, when he was running in the primaries, he had such a great organization in Seattle, and it is a very grassroots organization where club owners, bands, musicians, and music fans were putting fundraisers together and raising thousands of dollars for Bernie Sanders, and I don't see why that wouldn't happen again, especially if he gets the nomination by the party, which I think would be the smartest thing for the Democrats to do this time around. And we also have this issue of the Showbox Theater, which is a grand old theater where Duke Ellington performed and some of the greatest musicians in Seattle. I'm standing here right now in the studio next to actually a gold-plated record. It's actually Jimi Hendrix's record, though. And there's a picture of him, and he kind of represents what people believe in Seattle, which is that this isn't a city for music. And we need to protect that. And along with that means that we need to protect our neighborhood. We need to stop some of this mass gentrification, which is wiping out some of the venerable clubs in Seattle, like the old Off-Ramp, which is now called the El Corazon, the Showbox Theater. We still have great clubs, no doubt. Numos, the Crocodile, Tractor Tavern, Showbox, these are great places to play. They're historic places to play in Seattle, but we need to protect them. And I think right now, I'm going to do my part, Jeff. I'm going to bring my guitar down to the Federal Building because there are impeachment rallies between 5 and 7 today in Seattle at the Jackson Federal Building. So I'll be down there singing my song about the oligarchy, and, I have a song about Bill Gates and Paul Allen and Jeff
Donald
Santos
Trump, of course, too.
Donald Trump, they're all kind of part of this, multi-billionaire crowd, although I don't know how much Trump actually has in his bank account. We don't know because we don't know what his tax returns say. He may actually not have as much money as he'd like us to believe, but it doesn't really matter.
I would agree with that assessment, actually.
We have a situation where the stock market today is doing great, so apparently, I had a friend ask me, well, how do you explain this, Mark? The economic situation on Wall Street, they seem to be having a party. I'm saying, yeah, they're having a party because what they're doing right now has nothing to do with ethics or high crimes and misdemeanors. They don't care. This is a non-ethical, immoral, amoral game here on Wall Street. They don't care who's president as long as the money's flowing and they're getting rich. So he could be a criminal, he could be, a warmonger, whatever. They're fine as long as their stocks are going through the roof. They're happy. And unfortunately, that's what we have to deal with in this country, and a lot of that reflects the politics that we see, too, because we have 2 parties who sort of became very corporatized and very much controlled by major corporations like health, insurance companies, pharmaceuticals. We just heard about what happened with Obama on the education issue when he gave in on that. And I think the musicians need to get involved with this. They need to stand up there, too. They need to be at the rallies. I know in Seattle, whenever there's a major protest or rally, you definitely are going to have music. Somebody like even Jim Page, not Jimmy Page, but there's a local guy here, Jim Page. I think he's released like 21 albums now or something, and he's a great protest singer. He's kind of known all over the world for down and dirty protesting. It's just him and his guitar, and he goes everywhere. Whenever there's a protest, they call on Jim. He was here during the WTO 20th anniversary celebrations, playing at all the venues, and he'll probably be down there at the Federal Building today. And so there are the regulars here in Seattle that do show up and share the music. I think what I'd like to see is maybe a few more of the major acts. Just start doing what they used to do, which are, free shows at the Pike Place Market or secret shows at the Showbox or something to, kind of add to the milieu and bring their name to it. Because Pearl Jam or Soundgarden or someone, and Soundgarden has a new singer, by the way, so they could put on shows and help raise some of this money for this Showbox Theater, because right now, Historic Seattle, a nonprofit, wants to buy it. They've made that very clear. And they are partnering with another group in town, which is involved in a lot of music promotion events and a lot of roadies work for them and stuff. They are all pushing to support Historic Seattle. Now, one of the things that's happening besides the impeachment rallies tonight is also tomorrow there's a major hearing before the Landmark Preservation Board in Seattle, and it's going to determine whether more controls are placed on the Showbox Theater. Right now, we've been able to save basically the structure of the building, but it doesn't require that whoever buys it doesn't gut it. But we don't know. What we really want to see and what the community wants to see, what the city council and the mayor and pretty much everyone in the music industry here in Seattle wants to see, they want to see Historic Seattle buy it. They need to raise $40 million, but it can be done, Jeff. Look at the amount. Every time somebody says, that's a lot of money, Mark, I say, look at the amount of money being raised right now in the next 24 hours in this political race for the White House.
And how much money is going to the military-industrial complex right now?
Yes, amazing amounts, yeah. I mean, I've seen the latest projections on the national budget, and yeah, most of it's going to military. So, here's the president, trying to cut food stamps for 3 million people, and it's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of our actual budget. So we have our priorities really skewed. I think that's been happening ever since, probably, unfortunately, ever since Ronald Reagan became popular, got elected. We've sort of gone backwards on the New Deal FDR thing. I mean, yeah, the school that I went to was built by during the Franklin Roosevelt.
We were just talking about that with Melissa Tomlinson. I mean, it's the same thing here. We got schools that have mice in them, schools that that people are falling through the bottom of the buildings to. I mean, it's just disgusting. I mean, the fact that it was 80 years ago, whatever it is, that FDR was president and that the buildings were built in 1937 and 1941. This is crazy.
It's a tribute to the FDR administration that they did this, though. But I'm saying, we could do this again. I think so. Joseph Stiglitz had a lot to say about how a society mobilizes like happened during World War II. I mean, sometimes you just have to mobilize your country to deal with major issues, and one of those issues that we haven't dealt with is education. We really need an education New Deal as well as a Green New Deal, because we're suffering, and eventually it will be an economic issue. When the education suffers, eventually it will affect Wall Street. They just don't care right now because it's all about quick profits. But at some point, it kind of dumbs down your entire media, your politics, everything just kind of gets dumbed down. And I think that's partly how somebody like Donald Trump came along, because the dialogue is at about a 12-year-old level now, because neither the media, except for your show, of course, and you're a brilliant guest, most of the media and most of my colleagues in journalism are not very educated themselves. So.
Well, no, I mean, you have Hillary Clinton taking money from charter schools. You have the other candidates in the past who have done this. You have on the Democratic side, never mind the Republican side, which is bought and paid for and has basically been pimping, big, powerful interests for over 50 years, 40 plus years. And the fact is that, this has unfortunately become a crisis. And, it may not recognize that people may walk down the street not thinking that the country's in a crisis. We're not in a war like we were in World War II, or, we don't have, we have media everywhere where, as Bruce Springsteen said, at the time, 52 channels, nothing on. We're consumed by a lot of things in our own little, there's a TV ad. I don't know which car company it is, but basically it's a song that says, look at me, as this guy is walking down with headphones and an iPhone, looking at his, texting his girlfriend or whatever, and a car is about to run him over as it backs up, and of course the warning lights come on for the car, and tells the person to stop. But this is where we are, and it's not just people who are 20 years old, it's people who are 60 or 80. They're just distracted by different things, and we need to come together, or we're going to fall together, and it's going to be a disaster for this country. I mean, we're not playing games here. We don't want to be, alarmist, but at the same time, better wake up.
Well, this idea that we can just be a consumer society, that our job is just to work 8 hours a day and then spend our money at Walmart, that's not going to fly.
Nope.
There's more to the American dream than being able to get cheap goods from China, and we all know that. And it's really sad what's happened to the middle class in this country. I mean, it's even worse what's going on, of course, with the poverty. I live in a city that has mass homelessness, and it's still not an issue that all of these progressives and Jenny Durkin, former U.S. attorney, friend of the Obama administration who ran and won as a progressive and said every person deserves a home. Well, there's still thousands of people sleeping on the streets. Bernie Sanders, we talked about this before, when he was mayor of Burlington, Vermont. Oh, my God. I mean, how consistent is this guy?
Yeah.
He came to Seattle to talk about rent control. Why? Because part of his policy in Burlington was that housing is a human right, and he still believes that. But when you look around and you see everybody having a party on Wall Street and living it up, meanwhile, we have a potential criminal in the White House. It's kind of like my song. He's beginning to sound a lot like Nixon. He's starting to do that whole Nixon thing. Then we have all these people living in tents around the country in all the major cities. No good manufacturing jobs for them. Trying to live on minimum wage when the rents are going through the roof because the major corporations and development companies are pushing, for massive development, at least in my part of the country. So like the opposite of Detroit, they're overdeveloping here to the point where I don't know what they're going to do with all these buildings and all these offices. I mean, they're never going to fill them all up. I'll be very surprised if they can fill them within the next 5 years, because not that many people are moving to Seattle at the moment. And you know what? I've been reading online. There's new posts popping up on videos on YouTube about, why not to move to Seattle. So guess
Well,
what?
yeah, I mean, isn't that the case? For a number of years, everybody wants to go to Seattle. It was the grunge movement in the 90s and the boom and all that. Now, why do people want to be, under the thumb of Mr. Bezos and Amazon? By the way, just as a side note here, in Fall River, Massachusetts, a big Amazon not far from where we broadcast today, Mark, and it's one of the worst safety records in the entire world of Amazon companies. It is, the more and more we look at this and we put so much money into one person and one company, as Amazon is, this to me is really scary. Kudos to Ms. Sawant and all the people who basically fought back and won. And that goes to show you, folks, you can do it. You don't have to have, $1 million to win, thankfully, a city council race or a race for mayor. You can beat back the oligarchs of the Bezos and so forth, as those two candidates just did. Your friend, Mr. Lewis, I think,
and
right?
as a journalist, I've met politicians who are actually in it for the right reason. There are people who are good public servants, and they remember what it means to be a public servant. By the way, do we have a couple minutes? Because can I play like 10 seconds or 20 seconds of a song? Can you think you could hear it?
Go for it. Improv radio, folks.
They say that William Gates owned on half of this whole town with political connections. He spreads his wealth around, and the rumors of his party increase by his yacht. He's happy with everything he's got. I curse my poverty, and I wish that I could be.
We're going to get some tapes of Mark. Woo! That's Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. Mark, what we're going to do going forward is when we get our new production back up January 1, we're going to actually have you do play some CDs for you and so forth once we get into our new system. That was awesome, my friend. Once again, the Renaissance man comes through. As I said earlier, music plays a major role, and it inspires people to act. And you just did there. And I know you'll be playing tonight at some of these events in Seattle. And, I know people are listening to us who are on Twitter and so forth. Where are these events taking place tonight in Seattle?
There's a major rally at the federal building, at the Jackson Federal Building, named after former Senator Henry Jackson, and that's happening from 5 to 7. And that was something that Congresswoman Jayapal was talking about last night. She was really encouraging people to go to the impeachment rallies today, and it's happening all over the country, all 50 states. So this is a national event. And, of course, as a journalist and as a member of the community and a resident of the United States, I want to be there. It's a very historic moment. There were some frank discussions on the conference call last night. There were folks from mainly, her constituents on the call and people that she's worked with on different kinds of campaigns. And there was some criticism about the whole impeachment process and how it might distract from some of these other issues, like her Green New Deal agenda. But, she just said very plainly, just kind of like a lot of the folks in the House have said, is that I know, they don't want to shut down the government. They're not trying to be Republicans and be complete obstructionists. What they want to do is just try to hold the leader of the country accountable. That's all. And they want to go on record as doing that. Whether it's a fait accompli or not, and the Senate will just give him a pass or a bye, as they, in sports tournaments, remains to be seen. But it's an important part of the national dialogue, and I know people are kind of fed up on both sides. National politics right now is not pretty. I thought it was really interesting when the leader of the impeachment proceedings, came out to the press conference and said about 3 words and walked away. I don't know whether that was just out of disgust from being bullied and badgered by the Republicans of the entire proceedings, or whether he just really was pissed off. But I don't know if you saw that, but I was watching live when they actually made the announcement that they were going to. And yeah, it was shocking. The Republicans did all their did the typical grandstanding, and gaslighting that they do to try to attack the process rather than actually defend the president, and just accuse anybody of accusing them of something of being corrupt themselves. They love to do that too. So it's all about Biden, apparently. Apparently, this impeachment is actually, according to the Trump administration, about the vice president and his son, and has nothing to do with Donald Trump.
Yeah, so it's all Hunter Biden's fault. Yeah. I mean, I'm no fan, but I mean, it's typical Donald Trump: distract, and create something completely different. And that's what Republicans do. That's what Mr. Trump is all about. And frankly, he's a master at being a con man. Just one thing, folks. I just want to make sure, and I want to ask you: do you have a West Coast venue for this debate, Mark? And since we won't be talking to you for a couple of weeks with the holidays coming up, do you think that we'll get some issues that are that are the climate change oriented? We talked to Melissa about education. What are you hoping for on Thursday night?
I would love to see them talk about the Green New Deal, and I wish that they were in Seattle instead of Los Angeles. But you can go to democracywatchnews.org and check out my coverage of this stuff. We have a bunch of new podcasts up. And, I think, I wish they were in Seattle. That's my comment on it. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how Bernie Sanders comes out, because to me, he's the person that we should all be focusing on. But he's the guy that could win this election, as far as I'm concerned.
The only way to motivate 18 to 35-year-olds, as we just talked about, 52%, according to our friend at Twitter. Mark, all the best. Happy holidays to you. Have a great Christmas and Happy New Year. We'll talk to you in the new year. If not, there's some surprises coming up over the next few days. Thank you, my man.
Have a good holiday, Jeff. The best to you and your audience and all your great guests. We'll see you next year.
See you next year. Thank you, Mark Taylor-Canfield. I want to thank Bob for producing this broadcast, of course, with help from Tony Lopes, and thank Mark Pacheco for giving me this platform. We'll be back tomorrow, folks. Impeachment Day. Get out there, support the progressive organizations that are out there. My name is Jeff Santos. Keep on fighting, folks. Right now, it's my time to say, I gotta go.
You are listening to the voice of Southeastern Massachusetts for news, sports, and talk. AM 1530 WVBF and FM 2599 DD 99.7
USA Radio News with Chris Barnes.
As U.S. House Democrats prepare for a vote on 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump tomorrow, the Senate's top Democrat Chuck Schumer is calling for testimony to be heard from current and former White House officials when it reaches a Senate trial. However, the top Republican, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, indicated on the Senate floor a short time ago that's not going to happen.
The Senate is meant to act as judge and jury, to hear a trial, not to rerun the entire fact-finding investigation because angry partisans rushed sloppily through it.
Goldman Sachs says it's going to devote a lot more money and time to projects that fight climate change and help financially disadvantaged people. The investment banking giant announcing yesterday that it's going to target a staggering $750 billion to those efforts over the next 10 years. And along with those steps, Goldman says it's also going to adopt a formal ban on financing some drilling and coal mining ventures as well. Guess what turns 30 today? The Simpsons, turning 30 years old today after more than 670 episodes on Fox and 34 Emmys. The most famous family from Springfield actually got their start in 1987 as short films during the Tracy Ullman Show, but they got their own show on Fox on December 17th, 1989. The Simpsons has been renewed through its 32nd season next year. And for USA Radio News, I'm Chris Barnes.
Democrats also accused the president of waging an unprecedented campaign of obstruction by refusing to provide documents or witnesses in the impeachment inquiry. No other president has flouted the Constitution and power of Congress to conduct oversight to this extent, the report said. In the Judiciary Committee's first day of hearings, 3 constitutional scholars summoned by Democrats told lawmakers that Trump's actions clearly meet the historical standard of impeachment. University of North Carolina law professor Michael Gerhardt said Trump committed multiple impeachable offenses and called Trump's conduct worse than the misconduct of any prior president, including Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and Richard Nixon. Trump declined Democratic Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler's invitation to have his lawyers participate in the hearing, with the White House counsel saying the process was biased against the president. Republicans used their time to denounce the hearings and pepper Nadler with procedural motions to create delays. We have just a deep-seated hatred of a man who came to the White House and did what he said he was going to do, said Representative Douglas A. Collins of Georgia, the committee's Republican co-chair. This is not an impeachment. This is just a simple railroad job. The evidence for impeachment is compelling, said the Los Angeles Times. Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff's report leaves no doubt that President Trump abused his power and compromised U.S. national security interest in Ukraine for his own political purposes, to damage a political rival. The report also describes the president's efforts to obstruct justice by stonewalling Congress's investigations. His repugnant acts are exactly the kinds of high crimes and misdemeanors that justify impeachment and a Senate trial. Only a blind partisan would argue otherwise. The Democrats' hyperbolic claim that Trump endangered national security show how weak the case for impeachment really is, said the Wall Street Journal. To be sure, Trump was foolish to casually mix domestic politics with foreign policy. But the Biden investigation never materialized, and the Ukraine aid was eventually released thanks to congressional pressure. The point has never been to determine if Trump deserves impeachment, said the New York Post. Acquittal in the Senate is almost certain, but the goal of the Democrats' circus is to shift public sentiment against the president. What the columnist said: House Republicans' defense of Trump is extraordinarily cynical, said John Cassidy in NewYorker.com. The GOP members of the Intelligence Committee released their own counter-report in completely absolving Trump of any wrongdoing. Incredibly, it depicts Trump as an anti-corruption crusader who withheld military aid from Ukraine out of genuine concern about reform efforts there. We know this is bunk because several witnesses, including Ambassador Gordon Sondland, testified that Trump only cared about the investigating of Biden. Republicans are proving there are virtually no ends to which they won't go in order to protect Trump. Democrats say Trump exploited his constitutional power for political purposes, said Andrew McCarthy in NationalReview.com. But Democrats are guilty of the same thing by pursuing impeachment on a blatantly political deadline. They know they don't have strong public support to remove the president and that the GOP Senate will not convict. So they're trying to get this over before the 2020 election season heats up. It matters fester too long. Democrats holding seats in pro-Trump districts may pay the price on Election Day. The House should not wait forever to vote on articles of impeachment, said Jennifer Rubin in the Washington Post. But Democrats should make a final stab in court to compel testimony from recalcitrant witnesses who could provide first-hand accounts of the pressure campaign against Ukraine. For example, the Intelligence Committee's report revealed that Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, made dozens of phone calls to the White House and to the Office of Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. At the time, Ukrainian military aid was being withheld. Mulvaney would make an interesting witness. Democrats should remember this. There is no guarantee that Majority Leader Mitch McConnell will hold a thorough trial or allow new material not presented by the House's original report. Now is their best chance to build a case against the president. And what next? House Democrats are debating whether to expand articles of impeachment to include charges beyond abuse of power in the Ukraine controversy, said Rachel Bade in the Washington Post. Some of the caucus have argued for adding obstruction of justice charges outlined in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report. Others want to indict Trump for violating the Constitution's emoluments clause by using the presidency to enrich his hotel and resort businesses. But moderate Democrats want to keep impeachment narrowly focused on Ukraine, fearing blowback in their GOP-leaning districts. Democrats might be better off keeping things simple, said Caroline Fredrickson in the New York Times. A scattershot approach will distract the public and allow Trump to muddy the waters by focusing on the weakest narratives. The best storyline is the simple one. Mr. Trump tried to bribe a foreign official with American government dollars to announce an investigation of unfounded charges against a domestic political rival. And Trump and U.S. allies spar at NATO summit. What happened? America's rift with its NATO allies widened this week after President Trump squabbled with world leaders at a summit to mark the alliance's 70th anniversary and left the event early after a video emerged of his counterparts mocking him. The stage was set for a showdown even before Trump arrived at the London meeting. French President Emmanuel Macron declared last month that NATO was strategically adrift and suffering brain death, and that the U.S. under Trump was turning its back on Europe. In a meeting with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, Trump, who once described the alliance as an obsolete, called Macron's comments nasty and very insulting. He later feuded with the French president at a joint press conference, complaining that European countries weren't doing enough to repatriate nationals who had joined ISIS and been captured in the Middle East. Would you like some nice ISIS fighters? I can give them to you, said Trump. Let's be serious, Macron replied, saying most of the detained jihadists were Syrians and Iraqis, not Europeans. Tensions rose further after a group of world leaders was caught on camera at a Buckingham Palace reception moaning about Trump's freewheeling press conferences. In the footage, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson asked Macron, "Is that why you were late?" Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he could see people's jaws dropping as Trump went on for 40 minutes. Trump called Trudeau two-faced and said the Canadian leader was simply annoyed that I called him out over Canada's failure to meet NATO defense spending targets. The president left the summit soon after. What the editorial said: NATO was created to defend the West from the Soviet menace, said the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, but its biggest threat today may be internal. Trump has alienated many of its members by haranguing them to spend at least 2% of their gross domestic product on defense, or else. This week, he even refused to say whether the U.S. would come to the defense of a delinquent member country. Then there's NATO member Turkey. Its purchase of Russian-made anti-aircraft missile systems is antithetical to the alliance. So long as NATO divided over these internal issues, it won't be able to tackle external threats, especially a revanchist Russia. Far from weakening NATO, Trump has strengthened the most important U.S. alliance, said the New York Post. Since he took office and began demanding other countries stop free-riding on the U.S., Canada and NATO's European members have boosted defense spending by $130 billion. A West with stronger, better-funded militaries is a safer place. What the columnist said. Trudeau isn't the first world leader to poke fun at Trump, said Aaron Blake in the Washington Post. The entire UN General Assembly erupted in laughter last year when Trump proclaimed that his administration had accomplished more than almost any other in America's history. And in 2017, Australia's then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull was filmed impersonating Trump. We're winning in the real polls, the online polls. At an off-the-record dinner, Trump came to power promising he'd stop the world laughing at us. He may have succeeded by making it laugh at him. Some of Trump's criticisms of NATO are justified, said Tom Rogan in WashingtonExaminer.com. Too many give only lip service to mutual burden sharing, but the alliance still has disproportionate benefits for America. The U.S., for example, exports $318 billion in goods a year to the European Union. That trade would disappear if the EU were subjugated to Russia. The alliance's problems can and must be fixed, but NATO must remain. In its 70-year history, NATO has never faced such deep, even existential trouble, said Bobby Ghosh in Bloomberg.com. The alliance survived past spasms of disunity because of the common perception of the threat posed by the Soviet Union, and more recently Russia. But Trump is now cozying up to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Turkey is buying arms from the Kremlin, and Macron is ambivalent at best. Reawakening all NATO members to the enduring and potent threat of Moscow will require powerful political leadership. Nothing said or done in London suggests such leadership is at hand. In the It Wasn't All Bad section. 20 years ago, Robert Van Sumeren stood before Judge Michael Smith as a convicted felon, sentenced to nearly 6 years in prison for a string of robberies. Last month, the 40-year-old again appeared before Judge Smith at Hillsdale County Courthouse in Michigan to be sworn in as an attorney. After Van Sumeren left prison in 2005, he earned degrees in comparative religion, sociology, and psychology. In 2015, he decided to pursue a law degree at Wayne State University and passed the bar exam last summer. This seems like an appropriate place to end this chapter of my life, he said.